coat of gold, a coat of red, a lion still has claws.
Greetings, everyone. Brad here with Mild Mannered EDC. Today we're going to do a classic Mild Mannered review of this interesting knife from Viper Knives. It's a Jesper Voxnes design. It is the Viper Knives Katla. There you go. Maybe it's Katla. I don't know. I'm going with Katla because I like the sound of that better. So there you go. Now, before we get too much further into the review, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody who supports the channel or supports me over on Instagram or just supports me in general. Really, really do appreciate it. You make this really a fun activity for me and something that I hope you get a little use out of and enjoyment as well. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If it's something you like here in the content, if you're finding the content likable, give it a thumbs up, maybe consider subscribing. And if you don't, give it a thumbs down. It's all fair here on YouTube, right? So thanks so much to all of you, new and steady eddies. So with that, let's go ahead and get underway with this particular review. Let's start with a couple specs here. So the Viper Knives Katla has a blade length of 3.125 inches. It's got a blade thickness of 0.15 inches. It's got a handle length, when it's closed up here, of 4.50 inches. And a handle thickness of 0.42 inches. Now that gives us an overall, when it's all opened up here, tip to tail, of 7.8 inches, and a weight of 4.40 ounces. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I think there's some reasons for that. There's some different variants, but this one's about 4.4 ounces. It actually doesn't bother me too much, but it is a little on the heavier side. And we'll get into that as we do the review. How about a couple of size comparisons here of the Katla? How about with the Spyderco Capara, which I feel like is a good comparison idea there. We can also potentially, if I can get this on the screen, the Kershaw Dividend. So there you go. I mean, so in a lot of ways, you know, this is very much, I mean, it's smaller than the Capara. It's a little bigger than the Dividend. How about a classic Swiss Army knife here? There we go. You know, so I mean, it's a very reasonable knife, in my estimation, and certainly in the type of knives that I like in terms of size, etc. Like I said, it's a little bit heavier than I normally like, but yeah, we'll talk about that. So we're going to go ahead and do a classic mild-mannered review with this knife today. So when we do that, we talk blade, then we talk action, then we talk scales and hardware, and then ergos and carry. So let's just get right underway into that blade. There it is, the Kaiser.
Wake up, stupid! Wake up!
The Viper Katla blade. As you can see there, Viper, they like to put their big old logo right there, which is, it's all right. And the Katla name, you know, I don't know. It doesn't bother me all that much, but I could see how it might bother a few people. So what do we have with this particular blade? As you can see there, the Vox design from Jesper Voxnes. We have an M390 steel blade. Now, I know there is some contention out there around the softness or lack of hardness of Italian M390. That may be true. I've never verified that for myself, but I've certainly watched some channels out there and some information about that. You know, maybe it is a little on the softer side. I couldn't tell you, but what I will say is it works perfectly adequate for me, and I'm not going to get too hung up on that. So there you go, but just a disclaimer, I know some folks have some issue with Italian M390. So there you go. Now, what do we have here? We have somewhat of a Tanto style blade. I mean, it's kind of a Tanto. It's kind of a drop point. I don't know. You decide. It also has sort of this flat satin finish, right? Or a satin finish with this flat grind. And then it's got sort of this faux, you can kind of see it there, faux compound grind, right? Where you've got this line in here where it's sort of, it's purely a design aesthetic. The grinds are not different. They're flat grinds both. I don't see any difference between, yeah, I mean, it's just, like I said, I think it's purely an aesthetic choice, which, you know, hey, I kind of like it actually. It doesn't bother me. Similar to the, what's the ZT 0393 that I think I had for a while. Again, sort of that faux, compound look, whatever. I think it's fine. I like the blade on this a lot. Like I said, it's a little thick, but you got this beautiful swedge here, this wonderful crown spine, which you always get on, or almost always get on Italian knives, which I am definitely a sucker for, as I've mentioned before. A little bit of very fine jimping here, enough to give you some traction, but not enough to be, problematic if you're a sensitive fingered sole. And then you've got your thumb studs right there for deployment, and we'll talk about that in action. But yeah, overall, very, very nice blade. It's got a nice grind. They nailed, you've got a definite finger trail here, but they definitely did a nice job with the grind. It's very even, kind of up and throughout. It's quite sharp, came sharp. And as I mentioned, softness, I don't know. I suppose if it goes dull sooner than I might expect for an M390, then I'll just sharpen it up. But just something to know. So far, so good. As I mentioned, I've had this for quite some time, actually. So there you go. Now, let's move on to action. So the action on this knife is quite good, and it was good out of the box. Now, I owned a Anso Orso, so an Anso designed Orso knives from Viper not that long ago. And this one actually reminds me of it a little bit in terms of some of the things it's got going on. But one of the things that always sort of disappointed me with that knife was the detent. It was just a very soft detent. You could shake it open relatively easily. And yeah, it just wasn't overly satisfying. This is not that. This has an extremely well dialed in detent, a really nice action, both on the flipper and the thumb stud. I suppose you could flick it if you were, oh, there you go, look at that. So, and I'm not actually that good at that. So yeah, there you go. I actually haven't done that too much. So there you go. So I actually think the action on this is really, really done well. It's running on ball bearings and just overall having multiple deployments, a bit of a sharp flipper tab here, but again, that doesn't really bother me all that much. It's got a nice landing pad. Let me see if I can focus in there. Yeah, nice little landing pad there. Despite what that looks like, that blade is actually not that close. There you go. It's the term. There you go. So you're not going to cut yourself or anything there. But yeah, the nice little grooves in the carbon fiber there make this just really comfortable. And the flipper is just well designed for that, as well as the thumb stud. So I like the action on this a lot. I think it's really good, and I think over time it'll continue to smooth out. I mean, it's been very smooth, but I think it'll just get more smooth over time. Now, this is a liner lock knife. There you go. No blade play at all. No blade rock. Nothing there. Super solid, which is great. So, a lot to like here in terms of action, and as we just talked about earlier, the blade. Two parts of this knife they've done really, really well on so far. So there you go. Now, let's move into scales and hardware. I really like the scales and hardware on this knife.
Nice. Nice.
I think it's really, really attractive and interesting. Now, there are various models of this. You can get it in titanium. You can get it, I think, in micarta. You could get a CF version. This is the CF version, but you can get it without the milling around it, so it's a bit more plain. I just think the milling here, you see some of the detail on that. It's just done really, really well. There's no ragged edges or anything like that. They do it again here down at the back. And there you go. Yeah, so I mean, it's just done really, really well. There are no sharp spots, no, as I mentioned, no sort of ragged edges or anything like that. So I think the CF is really, really beautiful on this. Now, pairing that with sort of this, the brushed hardware, which I also think adds a nice touch and blends well with the blade, along with this milled titanium pocket clip. There you go. All very, very good. Now, it also has these copper accents, and these are actually copper. So you've got this copper backspacer, which is already starting to patina a little bit, if you notice that, and around the pivot collar there. I think that's a little bit of why there's some weight on this knife that might not otherwise. I mean, right, it's got these nested liners, and it's CF, so I expected this to be a little lighter than it is, but they are full nested liners, and again, as I mentioned, with this copper inlay, or with this copper backspacer, etc., I think you just get a little bit of a weight there. But I think the result of that also is a very well-balanced knife. I think the copper sort of evens out the blade, which is fairly heavy because it's pretty thick. So yeah, it's just pretty nicely done. Now, this pocket clip is interesting. We'll talk about it more in Ergos and Carry, but overall, it's done quite nice and doesn't create any hot spots or anything like that. So even this little area here, which you might have expected to cause an ergo problem, it really doesn't. But again, we'll talk about that in a second. So overall, I think the scales and hardware of this particular knife is very, very nicely done. And I'm not only a fan of the way it looks, but I think it's just executed quite well. So there you go. Now, since I was already sort of leaking into some of that, let's talk about Ergos and Carry. So very, very ergonomic knife. This feels great in the hand. It's got a wonderful grip. Not surprising, Jesper Voxness, one of his strong suits is definitely ergonomics. The or the jimping here up on the blade is perfect. The finger choil, yeah, I mean, you can choke up, don't choke up. Either way, it's very, very comfortable. Now, the pocket clip does maybe give you I think I said a second ago, no real hot spot. And it doesn't really for me, but I could see some people potentially seeing that as a bit of a hot spot. As I mentioned, it's not for me, but it could be for some. There is a lanyard loop for those of you that want to put a lanyard on this. And just, yeah, overall, it's just very comfortable in hand. I really have enjoyed both carrying this and using this knife quite a bit. It's a really, really good user. Carry is a little bit, it's a little heavy. It's a little bit on the heavy side, and I think that's particularly because of this copper. And, it's just kind of a thick blade, which again is not completely abnormal for Italian-made knives, but that's sort of what you're dealing with here. The pocket clip is weird, and it's weird in the sense that it's recessed, which is awesome. It's deep clip, it's deep carry, which is awesome, except it's not really deep carry, right? You have to you can get it into about here, and then you've got this much sticking up. It's sort of in no man's land. It's not ambidextrous, so this is definitely just a right-handed carry knife, tip-up right-handed carry, although you can open it, I guess, with right or left hand with the flipper and the thumb studs, but that's sort of where you're left here with the pocket clip. Now, could they have pushed this up? Maybe a titch. It could have come up about to here. They've got these screws going on here, so I'm not sure what they could do about that. The lanyard hole, someone could say, well, you sacrificed the clip for the lanyard hole. I mean, maybe. I mean, they probably could have messed with it a bit in the design, and I think it is a little bit of a detractor with the design. Sort of makes it look a little less clean. But overall, of the things that bother me on this knife, that may be one of the bigger things, along with the weight, I think, a little bit. But by and large, it slides in and out of the pocket very easily. It's got good spring to it. It's a nice clip. It's well done. It's just in a little bit of a strange spot. So, I think that's purely up to you if you like that or don't like that, or if you like truly deep carry or whatever. So I suppose you could also make an argument that because this is a copper backspacer there, and you've got a little bit, you could potentially do that as a little bit of a glass breaker. I don't know if that's your thing. It's not really my thing, and I don't know if copper is the best metal to be doing that with, but anyways, just something, food for thought there. So, what do we got overall here? Well, you've got a $200 Vox designed Italian knife here. And you know what? For a pocket knife, so let me just say, I think this is a beautiful knife. I think it's well done. I think it's well made. It's got a great design. I think it's really attractive. I love that there's some options on it. I think the price is maybe a little high, but then again, in terms of everything that's out there these days, I'm not sure it's completely out of line. I mean, the $200 Capara, is it that much better than the Capara? Or, is the Capara, they're both around $200, and I think they're both equally really, really well-made knives. So for me, arguably a little better steel here on the Viper, although again, disclaimer, soft Italian steel, potentially, whatever. But, I think I think for me gets the designated mild-mannered masterpiece award, because I really do think this is an excellent knife. It's beautiful. It's fun to carry. It looks really interesting and eye-catching, and it ticks all the boxes for me. So this has been one of my favorite knives so far this year, and it gets that coveted award for me. Only another Italian knife got that this year, and that was the Spyderco Spy Opera. But yeah, that's where we sit here. Whoops, get that a little bit more up there for you. That's where we sit here with the Viper Knives Katla. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's given you some insights into this interesting knife, and if it's one you're looking at, I think you should consider picking it up, because I don't believe you will be disappointed. So with that, as we always say here on the channel, stay safe out there, be mild-mannered to one another, and and all the best.